and welcome to Juliet and Lucy's Quiet Leadership Revolution, the podcast for senior and aspiring leaders who want to make their voice heard and their impact felt through thoughtful, reflective, confident leadership. I'm Juliet Corbett, an executive coach and strategist, and I work one-to-one with senior leaders, guiding them to find their strategic focus, empower their teams, and regain control over their time.
And I'm Lucy Gower. I'm a facilitator, trainer and coach, and I empower leaders to build their happy, confident and high-performing teams. Today we're going to be talking about leading through complexity, something that every single leader that I've ever worked with has had to do, whether they've realised that that's what they're doing or not. And I think it might be helpful to start with to just define what Juliet and I mean when we're talking about complexity. So Juliet, over to you.
Yeah.
What's your definition there?
Okay, so I'm going to define it in contrast with complicated, because I think it helps us to delineate between the two. So I would say that a complicated problem is one where if you've got enough information and data and analysis and expertise, you would be able to actually solve that problem, answer that question with some kind of definitive answer. Whereas in a complex scenario, there's so much that's changing over time, dynamics, human dynamics, system dynamics, things that are being constantly shifting in a way that actually we can't possibly plan it all out in advance and then have a single answer. We have to navigate our way through it rather than find one single answer. What do you think, Lucy? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, Julia, I totally agree. And how I've seen that written, which has helped me when we talk about simple problems or complicated problems, it's that X can equal Y. So if the inputs are X, we know that Y is going to happen. For a simple problem, it could be X equals Y. For a more complicated one, it might be that X plus A plus B plus C divided by E equals Y. But there is a definite answer. These are the inputs that go in and this is the solution. For a complex problem, like you say, there's too many different moving parts, too many unknowns, that it is not possible to have that linear, this is your input that goes in and this is the result that comes out. And I think in terms of how our brains work, we really love certainty. Our brains crave it. So we're always looking for X equals Y. And when it's complex, we still want to do that, even though it's not necessarily possible. And I think that's where we get a bit of challenge in this whole kind of environment that we're all working in, which is complex.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there are two reasons why I think this is a really important podcast topic. One is that you could argue, and some might argue otherwise, but we're living in a more and more complex world, or we're working and leading through more complexity. But actually, more than that, bringing it right back to leaders' experiences, the leaders that I work with and talk with every day, it is this misunderstanding between how do we solve problems if they're complicated. There are complicated problems that leaders solve where there is, a lot of analysis, a lot of data, you can find the answer. But we have to understand that that set of tools that we've been kind of trained to turn to is not the right set of tools, or not the optimum set of tools for dealing with complex problems and challenges. And increasingly, it's the complex challenges that are the ones leaders really need to be able to step up and help guide their organisation through, navigate their organisation through.
Yeah, and I suppose it's different tools for different problems. So if, as a leader, you might have, a really clear problem that is it might be a difficult decision, but it's simple. The tools that you'll use to solve that, your analytical tools, will be different if it's something that is more complex. I'm trying to think of a tangible example rather than talking in X's and Y's. Go for it.
So I was talking to a client last week and they were talking about the modelling that they'd done to make a decision around the best way to finance a new piece of equipment that they needed.
Yeah.
Complicated problem. Yeah. They may not have come up with the one right answer, but they certainly came up with a very logical answer. They used the analytical, the financial modelling, had a quick look at it, looks perfectly sensible. They're going ahead with it.
Great.
Bingo. Complicated problem solved. The contrast to that, an example that I came up with, I was playing Ticket to Ride, the board game.
Oh, I love that.
This weekend. I know, I love that game too. And my kids are at the age now where we can play the full grown-up version, which is brilliant. And what I did was I slipped into the mistake against my 11-year-old daughter of thinking this is a complicated problem. So I had in my hand a plan for the next 3 steps of what I wanted to do. I was like, yes, I'm about to win, mummy rules, only to discover that she completely destroyed my plan because of the actions that she was
Yeah,
taking, which of course were completely in compliance with her goal for that
yeah,
game, but completely cut across what I was trying to do. And so
yeah,
I had misanalyzed the board game as being a complicated problem I could solve. And it clearly wasn't, because I was interacting
yeah,
with the 2 kids I'm playing with,
yeah.
and I didn't win
Yeah, and it's
because of
complex and
that.
there's lots of moving parts and you don't know where the other people are going to go. You don't know what's on their cards.
Yes,
You don't know if they're going to
yes,
block you. There's a bit where you have to go through tunnels and pick cards up. You don't know what cards you're going to
yeah,
get, whether you can get through the tunnel or not. Oh, I love Ticket to Ride. It's brilliant. And I
yes.
like it
We should
even
do a whole
more now.
episode, Lucy, on board games that we love. But yes, apart from that,
Yeah.
but that's a great example of
Mm,
actually even there is complexity even in tiny things that look quite straightforward.
mm,
The complexity that most of the leaders we're working with are dealing with a clearly much bigger picture, much bigger scale than winning a game of Ticket to Ride with your kids. But it is the same idea of the complexity
yeah,
is because we can't predict what the situation is going to look like. And
yeah,
there's different ways that the system is interacting that could be unexpected and dynamic and shifting. And some things are going to be uncertain into the future. And it becomes a really interesting challenge. But if we try and look at it as a complicated problem to solve,
yeah,
we're just going to fail.
yeah. Yeah, with lots of moving parts and lots of adaptations that all players will need to make as we go along, which I suppose brings
Yeah.
me on to perhaps the next thing to talk about. Now we've talked about complex problems and what they are. It's as leaders, what are the things that we need in this new toolkit in order to be able to tell the difference between the two and to navigate both of those things, perhaps sometimes at the same
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. So, Lucy, what's your first step? What would you
Yeah,
normally
I think
recommend at this point?
my first step is comes back to a lot of the things that we've talked about before in this podcast is about slowing down in order to really be able to see the situation and what is going on. And I think each one of us has a single lens on the situation at hand, and it's trying to look through different perspectives and to get a overall picture of what's going on, not just what's going on for you and how you see things at that particular point in time. So that might look
Yeah.
like involving other people. I mean, it might look like, it definitely looks like involving other people. If you're trying to solve a complex problem on your own, that is not to be advised. So
Yes.
involving other people, other people's perspectives, it might be your service users, your customers, other people within your organization, and people who know nothing about the system or problem that you're looking at that can bring naive questions that you can't see because
Yeah.
you're too involved and you know too much about the topic. So that's slowing down and involving other people and other perspectives is my first kind of thought. What about you, Juliet?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting, isn't it? So many of the topics we talk about on the podcast interlink, but it is
Yeah,
that slowing down so that you can hear your intuition. It's slowing down so that you make time to talk to other people and get other opinions and perspectives. And one of the ways that I like to think about it is often trying to actually visualize the system. It's impossible to actually write it all down. I mean, you could try and get some flip chart piece of paper on a big table and map out the system, but
mm,
even then, you're not going to be able to solve it completely. It's not a complicated problem; it's a
mm-hmm,
complex problem.
mm-hmm,
But trying to visualize the system that you're working in is really helpful, and you're getting those other perspectives because you want to see other parts of the system that you haven't seen.
mm-hmm.
And those other perspectives are also helping you to question the assumptions that you're making about how things work
Yeah,
so that you're able to spot blind spots and kind of fill in those blind spots. You're able to realize that not everybody works with the same set of assumptions about how the world works, and anticipating what other people might do and how they might respond.
yeah, yeah,
So it is that seeing different perspectives for all these different
yeah,
different reasons. You're exploring. You're acting as a kind of explorer.
yeah. Exactly. And I think there's something really valuable in like we all hold bias. We've all got our way of how we look at the
Mm,
world and situations, and there's no judgment in that. But it can be really helpful to say it out loud. What assumptions am I making here? What assumptions do we
yeah,
all each and every one of us is making here? Or like, what if I'm wrong about this? What
yeah,
what if the opposite is true? And saying those things out loud in order to spark a different way of looking at something or a different perspective um, can
yeah,
be really helpful. You can get a group of people together and you all might have a different view, but actually talking about the difference will
yeah,
highlight almost like another layer of what systems or processes, environments that you're working in.
yeah. I love the example of those questions you're given. I think there's a real power to asking different questions. So you don't ask the classic questions of what's the right solution, or,
Yeah,
what does our analysis tell us we should do, as if that would answer the question
yeah,
for us. But the questions that you're asking are around kind of what don't we know yet? What
yeah,
assumptions haven't we spotted? Um, and trusting your intuition as well. What
yeah,
feels important here?
yeah.
Like, even if you can't explain why something feels important, you can name, or this feels important, we should explore it more.
Yeah, what your hunch is. And I think there's
Yeah,
something there that comes back to how our brains work and, about we can have all the facts, we can have data, and that's really, that's really important. But how we feel and how we emotionally respond to something and why we are responding to something emotionally is part of this piece of discovery, this mix to get the whole picture. And
yeah,
I'm not saying that our hunches or our gut feelings are always right at all, but I do think it is important to acknowledge if you have a gut feeling or a hunch about something and to be able to say it out loud so that can be discussed and part of the mix as
yeah,
well.
yeah. And what you're doing there is saying, I think this is something important for us to explore further. You're not
Mm,
saying, I've got a hunch and therefore we're going to make this decision purely based on this hunch, but that hunch is going to give you a good sense of, yeah, we need to explore that a bit more,
yeah,
because I haven't quite got the idea of exactly why I feel this way, but I have this strong sense that this is going to be important.
yeah,
Um, and knowing that you're not you're not going to be able to map it all out, so it's not wasted time to do that. Even if
yeah,
that doesn't lead to the answer, it will create a learning point for
yeah,
you and for the group to have
yeah.
explored that particular area.
And it's kind of like highlighted things that often perhaps don't get talked about. And you might have a hunch about something, and to be able to discuss it and
Mm,
then to get other perspectives that may say, actually, this hunch is worth exploring a bit more. Or you get
yeah,
to the resolution, you're almost like coaching within the group that you're in. You get to the
yeah,
resolution that actually it's really important to acknowledge this hunch. This hunch is about me being scared of doing something new, and it comes from a different place. I've talked about that, and we know that that is perhaps a bias that I have to not take risks. With everybody knowing that, that's another part of discovery. And whether that's about,
yeah,
I'm talking about one person, but actually everyone in the group to be able to vocalize their hunch, how they feel about something. There's not a right or wrong in
yeah,
that, but I think it can be extremely insightful if you're working in a group that is able to take the time and space and trust each other enough to be able to
yeah,
do that.
absolutely. And I think that there's two very interconnected elements at play there. One of them is the hunch or the intuition that I don't think that this stakeholder group's going to respond well to that. Okay, why? I don't know
Yeah,
yet, but I've just got this feeling, this hunch.
yeah,
That's one element to explore.
yeah,
And then the other element, which is obviously interconnected, is I have a feeling, meaning I have an emotion. I
yeah,
feel a bit worried about that, or that idea really scares me. Okay, so you've now got an emotion
yeah,
connected to that idea on the table, positive or negative. I'm really excited about this one. Okay, it's then exploring, okay, so what does that emotion tell us? And there it's having the vulnerability to be able to name emotions as
yeah,
being, these are useful points of information.
yeah,
They're not the be all and end all, but we don't leave them outside the door. This idea
yeah,
that we can leave our emotions outside of our work is it's
Ridiculous.
naive. It really is. It's old fashioned. That isn't how we work.
Mm,
But what we can do is to name it
hmm
and then kind of explore it in a way that helps us to understand, okay, so why are we feeling nervous about this thing?
hmm
And that helps us all as a group
hmm
to understand better something. We're learning something about the system.
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually, you've sparked me to remember something. Like, we can feel nervous about something because, oh, we've tried this before and it didn't work. And I think, our experience of the past are really important. But if we're talking about complex problems, this comes back to that,
Yeah.
to X doesn't necessarily equal Y. So in the past that you, I don't know, wrote to these stakeholders with this similar message and it didn't work very well. There's lots of reasons why it might not have worked very well. It's very good learning. It doesn't mean that
Yeah.
that's the same situation again. So what's happened in the past doesn't necessarily indicate what is likely to happen in the future if it's a
Yeah.
complex problem. But that's not to
Yeah.
say that it's not important to be able to have that discussion about it, and that's
Yeah.
important intel.
Definitely, definitely. It's interesting, isn't it? It's that assumption, the way we assume that cause and effect works kind of in the physical world,
Mm,
like this cause will always create this effect. So this letter that I write to my stakeholders will always cause this anger that we get back.
yeah,
But actually, we're not working in the world of physics, we're working in the world of biology, where there's this
yeah,
infinite feedback loop, where this complex system of community, of people, of systems, of external
yeah,
environment is constantly shifting and changing. So we can't predict that that same message would have the same
no,
impact again this time. And it's a little bit the same as is projecting forward. So there's something interesting around the idea. We're going to come to action in a minute,
mm,
but even if you try something and it works in one place, even if it's a good experience, if you then automatically roll it out to everywhere, it might not work the same
yeah,
everywhere either. So it's backward looking and forward looking that we
yeah,
can't make the assumption that the cause and effect is always going to be the same.
yeah. Yeah, and different contexts, different cultures. Again, comes back to complexity. Too many moving parts,
Yeah,
too many things that are changing and different,
yeah,
and arguably moving quicker, change happening more quickly now than ever before.
yeah, absolutely. So we've talked a little bit about the
Mm.
biases. I
Mm.
think it's really important. I mean, you can get into a lot of detail here, but there's one bias that I see really coming into play with complex challenges, and
Mhm.
that is the we just need more information before we take action
Yeah,
bias. I'm sure it's got a fancy name, science
yeah,
name
I'm sure
somewhere,
it has.
but the we're not ready to act because we don't have enough information
Yeah.
kind of bias. And what's really interesting here is we're talking about slowing down, exploring, being curious, talking to other people. We're talking about a kind of a thought and feeling process, but actually action's really important
It is.
in this cycle, isn't
It
it?
is.
Did you see that sometimes too, that I want to avoid taking the difficult decision because I
Yeah.
just need more
Yeah.
information?
I see that a lot. When I've worked in organizations, I've been the person going off to remodel the business case for the nth time. I think that comes back down to fear of risk, and this feeling like if we it's safer not to do anything than it is to
Yeah,
make any sort of change happen. And I kind of need to feel safe by building a big amount of data around me for the reason that I've made this decision. Because when I take it up to the board and it gets signed off and it hasn't worked, I can go, well, look, I've spent 17,000 hours on this business case. I think
yeah,
that's where that comes from. And I think that we have so much more to learn by taking action in a changing world than keep remodeling business cases or
yeah,
keep getting more data. But because by the time we've got the data, some of the things about what we are intending to do will have shifted and changed. So you could be in
yeah,
for a forever we need more data loop and not be
yeah,
learning anything because you're stagnating essentially.
yeah.
See that a
Yeah,
lot.
it now looks like, and I've seen this in many different kind of board discussions as well, where even the board's looking for more data
Yeah,
to kind of feel safe about making that
yeah,
decision. So it happens all the way through an organization, but
yeah.
it increasingly looks to me like that's us trying to solve a complicated problem through more
Yes.
analysis, more data, rather than actually acknowledging this is a complex problem, and yes, it feels a bit scary, but we're going to have to make a decision.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
decision might be, and you might get lucky that you can find little things to play with, which means that you're learning more whilst making small steps in a direction. And sometimes the decision is it's just a once and done decision. It is a big choice. You've got one opportunity to make the choice, and you just have to be really courageous and say, we are ready to make a courageous decision without all the data, because that's never going to happen.
So I think what is can be really helpful in that is back to our definition at the beginning about a complicated problem or a complex problem. You can say, okay, is this complicated? Are we being scared about making a decision? Or is this complex and actually X doesn't equal Y, so we need to start to take some action in order to figure it out. And I suppose it's how you address a complex problem and how you address a complicated problem, just slightly different bits of the toolkit,
Yeah.
right? And it
Yeah.
can be helpful to that your board or your colleagues understand the difference between the two in order to help them be less fearful about taking some actions, which I guess brings us on to the next kind of
Yeah.
bit of this leading complex problems podcast.
So, Lucy, tell us a little bit more about taking action. But the reason I'm
Yeah.
asking you is because I also see this connection to the innovation
Yeah.
lens that you use. So,
Yeah.
tell us a bit more about where do you look for these kind of actions that we can start taking?
So for me, this is all about like what's the smallest action that you can take that is going to give you some more data to help you to inform what you do next. Sometimes it gets talked about safe experiments, or it gets talked about, you're piloting something or you're prototyping something. I mean, choose whatever language that you prefer. The point is we don't learn anything by gathering more data. We learn by testing things out as small and risk-free as possible, but with a big enough that with whatever happens, we can draw some conclusions on and think about what we do next. And actually, you could be testing several, depending on the context, you could be testing several things out at the same time, but it's an action as well as a mindset of, um, you know, nothing to learn from doing nothing, lots to learn from lots of small experiments. And the more you can equip yourself, your board, and your team with that mindset of it's okay to test this. And if it fails, well, it's not a failure because you can't have a failed test. You've just learned that this way of doing the thing doesn't work as well as you thought it would. So let's try the next
Yeah.
way. Um, and that is definitely a mindset as much as an action technique.
Yeah. I think it's the learning that's the key part in there. So
Yeah,
it's what what can we do that's going to give us the greatest amount of learning whilst taking
yeah,
as small a risk as possible at
yeah,
this point. So it's a continuation of the exploring stage, but rather than just talking and exploring, you're actually acting and exploring.
yeah,
And I think it's being really conscious to set up those actions so that you don't know what you're learning, because obviously there'll be unintended learnings that will come out from
yeah,
everything, but it's what gap are we filling, what
yeah,
what is the thing that we don't know
yeah,
yet that we want to fill that gap with some kind of learning, so that
yeah,
we're creating these actions in a way that we can then learn
yeah,
from them.
yeah. And let's,
Yeah.
yeah, let's test that out. Or this is my hunch.
Mm,
How do we test that as small as possible? Whether that, we talked before about writing to stakeholders. Well, perhaps you write to a segment of them, or perhaps you test something digitally really quickly and see what response you
mm,
get. But that live response is the thing
yeah.
where the learning is, because that is how people are actually responding, which is
Yeah.
different to asking people questions in a survey or a focus group. It's you're testing out in real time, in real life, how your real situation, people, whatever it is, will respond, and that learning
Yeah.
is massive.
So I guess actually it's the feedback loop is important as well, isn't it? So if you've created an action that you can take to try something, it's a small thing, fairly low risk,
Yeah,
but actually if you've got no way of getting any feedback from it,
yeah,
you're not going to get the learning. So it's got to be something where you're going to be able to see how people behave or how people respond in some way so that you can monitor and get
Yeah.
that feedback loop
Yeah.
working.
Although
Yeah.
sometimes, and I haven't engaged my brain properly before I'm saying this, but sometimes the risk is, well, everyone's going to hate it, or it's gonna be terrible, and you might try whatever the thing is with a small segment, and nothing happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Perhaps that is your feedback loop. It depends what your hunch is, and it depends what you're going out to
Yeah.
test. And
I
being
think that's
able
a
to
really good
observe
point.
and being able to
Yeah.
observe like unintended consequences also.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go on, you go.
That is a really good point. The absence of response from a stakeholder group you feared
Yeah,
an emotional response from is itself a feedback, which is really helpful
yeah,
to understand
yeah.
going
And
forwards.
that
Yeah. So,
feedback might be about making you braver to test something
mm,
else. And, for many of us, if we have been working with simple or complicated systems and X does equal Y, this is a whole new world of uncertainty. And those little small tests is about what you learn from it, but it's also about our own confidence, our own mindset, our own ability to lead by example and show others um, about testing and learning, safe to fail experiments, whatever you want to call
mm,
them.
yeah. So I was reading a book recently. I recommend it to you actually, so I should
Mm,
recommend it to you, listener, as well. Um, Simple Habits for Complex Times. And one of the things that jumped out at me there was I've been sort of trained in a slightly scientific way, which means that I'm looking for, if we change one thing in a system, we don't change anything else at the same
mm,
time. And we don't, I wouldn't normally suggest a control group, if I'm honest, but there's almost like in my mind, there's a before and after data because we've made this change and then we can see
yeah,
what happens. But actually, what it talks about from kind of complexity theory is more that, well, if we take our view of the world is that everything is constantly shifting and changing anyway,
yeah,
so an experiment we do today might have a different result in a
yeah,
week's time. Actually, there isn't much point in doing one at a time and monitoring it. There isn't much point having a kind of a control group. Actually, their recommendation was do lots of little things at the same time and even do things that are sort of contradictory to each other, almost like testing out
yeah,
different assumptions. Have you come across that before? Is that
yeah.
something that marries onto the innovation space as
It
well? Because it was new to me. I thought that's really interesting.
it does, and I think it depends a bit on the context. Like if you're A/B testing a email title, for example, do you need a do you need a control group, or you could
Mm,
test loads and you see which one works the best?
mhm.
And that a control, so what you're saying is that a control group is almost obsolete, because what does that even mean anyway when things have changed since you did the control? Everything's changed.
Yeah.
And actually, I've got an example from, this is at least 5 years ago, if not more, of a piece of direct mail that a charitable organization would send to donors and supporters, and there was a control pack, and we played with the control pack and the results went up for the control packs. That kind of, I think that
Mm,
mirrors what you're saying, is that we were measuring against something that was obsolete, because that wasn't, the control pack should be your best pack, and you're trying to do better. So that does make
it's yeah,
absolute
and it's
sense to
that
me.
yeah, and it's that sense that if nothing's kind of static, if we're on as the sea in a boat that's constantly moving
Yeah,
and we can set our direction, but we never quite know if the current's going to change, the weather's going to change, the exact way that the wave formations are going to
yeah,
change. Like if it's constantly shifting and changing, if that's our view of the world,
yeah,
then actually it makes sense to try lots of different things at the same
yeah,
time.
yeah,
And even if you can't attribute one thing to the result, actually you probably couldn't have done anyway because everything was constantly
yeah.
shifting. So it is a case of actually you can take lots of small actions to
And
to to check what's happening, assuming that no one of them is so big that if it fails, you caused a critical incident. You've really done damage to the
yeah,
organization.
and I think when the context that you're talking about, if you've talked about, did you sort of say like analytical sort of science?
Mm.
that feels complicated because you know if you mix two different elements, you're going to get why. I don't have a
Yeah.
science background. Everybody knows this already, I think. But actually, in the context that we're talking now, is often with people, and we
Yeah.
are living in an environment that's constantly changing, and as a result, we're constantly changing. So for simple or complicated problems, yeah, a control group makes sense because there's X equals Y. But for
Mm-hmm.
complex problems, um, it's a constantly moving feast.
Yeah.
So you the actual premise of even having a control group, which is this is the X equals Y group, doesn't even
Yeah.
exist anymore. That blows my mind a
Yeah.
little bit actually as I'm talking about it, but it makes absolute sense in the context
Yeah.
of complexity.
And what it's showing for me at least is that I think my mindset defaults to complicated
Yeah,
as an assumption about the way the world works,
yeah,
and that increasingly I'm able to consciously switch that assumption to being no, no, this is a complex system.
exactly.
So when I read that and it surprised me, it's because I had inadvertently slipped back
Yeah.
into a complicated world assumption.
And that in itself is a real insight, isn't it? Because if each of us know that our default or our assumption or where like our comfort zone is to approach
Yeah,
something like it is complicated, and actually that was fine or is fine for complicated things, but being able
yeah,
to differentiate and go, actually, I need to use my complex toolkit now
yeah,
is really helpful for all of us as individuals. I'm going to make an assumption that we all will default back to simple or complicated because that's what our brains like. Our brains like to feel
yeah,
that there's certainty.
yeah,
And so the fact that there isn't certainty, and we're saying that if something is complex, there isn't one single solution that's right now, even if there is such a thing as something being the right solution right now, it's constantly
mm-hmm,
changing.
mm-hmm,
Um, that uncertainty can take quite a lot for our brains to recalibrate, to think about, let
yeah,
alone kind of quell our cortisol and adrenaline that will start going into fight flight
yeah,
mode because we're craving certainty.
yeah. I think I sort of have no evidence to back up your assumption that most of us default to
No.
complicated or simple, but I suspect that's true based on my experience and working with a whole variety of different leaders and groups. I think that that is because it feels safe to have to assume that there is some kind of
Yeah.
pattern, there is some kind of cause and effect, that if
Mm-hmm.
we just had enough information, we could find it,
Mm-hmm.
that we could solve for the one right answer feels quite comforting.
Yeah.
Um, and so what I'm slowly discovering is that actually more and more it is about intentionally for me and for the people I'm working with and leading, it is probably often a conscious switch
Yes.
that we need to make into a complex
Yeah.
mindset, which means we reach for a different
Yeah.
toolkit, as you said. And so naming it, explaining what you mean by that, naming it to the people you're working with
Yeah.
in your team, with your board, is a really important step to be
Yeah.
making.
I think that's the most important thing. In the same way that you'll
Yeah,
say, what assumptions am I making here? What if I'm wrong? What sort of problem is this that we're here to
yeah,
solve? And then
yeah.
take the toolkit, whichever toolkit that is needed.
Yes. Okay, so
Hmm.
what simple takeaways do we want people to kind of hold on to at the end of this conversation, Lucy?
I think, can I have more than one, please?
Yes, absolutely. You don't need to ask my permission. You know that,
I
Claire.
wasn't really asking your permission. I was buying myself a little bit of thinking time by asking. So, my more than one, I think being clear about simple, complicated, and complex, and having those definitions written up somewhere so that everybody within your kind of working leadership world knows what they're dealing with. Can I have three?
Yes, absolutely. Go for it.
So definitions. I think that there's a really difficult thing around making time to think, and we've talked about that. I think that was our very first episode. But this
Yeah,
mindset shift of this thinking time is absolutely key to make sure we're addressing the right type of problem and the time and space to challenge assumptions, get people together, really explore what the core of the problem is in order to be able to come up with solutions. So the time piece. And then your analogy of being on a boat, and you can control how you are steering the boat and what you are doing, but you can't control the tides, the weather, and everything that is happening. And that actually you might be sailing to a destination, depending on the tides and the weather, you might have to change where you're going to. That port might not be a safe place to dock. And so that kind of that fluidity of, there isn't one single right answer or one single destination, and to be, you're constantly at sea making those adaptations is quite a big mindset shift to move to. So I think those are my three
Yeah.
things. How many things would you
Yeah.
like, Juliet?
I've written down three, so I'm going to have three as well. And of course,
Ah,
my three were the same as
okay.
your three,
I
so I've
can
now had
talk
to think
about
of
Ticket to
three
Ride or
more to
something
do.
if you need to come up
But
with something. Okay, cool.
no, no, I'm good. I'm good. So the first thing I'm going to say is this
Yeah.
takes courage. This isn't easy, and in fact, I think some of the root of the challenges of leadership today is in the need to take courage to acknowledge complexity and to lead and navigate that complexity. So if you're feeling like this is hard, yeah, it can be hard.
Yeah.
It can be hard. So it takes a bit of courage to acknowledge this and to acknowledge we don't have all the answers. We don't know, there isn't a single right answer. All of this takes courage. The second thing I would say is I think that there are various different biases that will root us back into either, and it could be the two things could be true at once, either staying in that slowing down and not wanting to make a decision, not wanting to take action, or in the I'm so busy taking lots of action but not really thinking about it that I don't have time to think. And I think that it's navigating where you are on that spectrum to understand, okay, there might be biases in the way that we work, the way that we live, badge of busy, we've talked about it before, that are holding us into one of these modes more than the other. And so being able to navigate that with intention is really important. So taking the time to slow down and see the different perspectives in order to then take these actions, it's really important to see that sequence and the biases that can hold us trapped in one or the other. And then the final one, actually, which actually has only really emerged for me during this conversation, which is why I love doing this podcast, which is I do suspect that this is, at least for the majority of people to begin with, a conscious effort that's needed to maintain this new mindset, this complexity way of thinking. And so naming it and telling your team, telling your board, getting each other to remind each other, hang on a minute, we're treating this as complicated, but it's actually complex. I think that this is going to be something that we all practice and that we all get better at. And it may become default, but I suspect for most people, it's a conscious mindset that we want to adapt or adopt in order to challenge, kind of face these challenges with more confidence.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much we could unpack, Lucy. I have suspects that we'll come off this recording and realise the 15 things that we should have talked about as well.
But as usual.
We have come, as usual, exactly. What the rest we don't know is that we then carry on the conversation after we stop recording. But anyway, we have come to the end of our time today. So thank you very much for spending this time with us. I'm Juliet Corbett, an executive coach and strategist working one-to-one with senior leaders.
And I'm Lucy Gower, a facilitator, trainer and coach helping leaders develop high-performing teams. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share with colleagues and help leverage the impact of the quiet leadership revolution.